Okay, we talked about how to build a truth table for a complex sentence, but when you're dealing with symbolic sentences, its abstraction is difficult for students to understand. Keep in mind our students and most people are concrete operational thinkers when they're dealing with such abstract new ideas. In other words, they need a concrete example. So let's define a simple world to give a concrete example. I think that helps. So, okay. So I'm going to start with a proposition vocabulary, a list of all the proposition constants allowed in our world. And I'm just going to come up with 3 of them, P, Q, and R. The reason I'm doing that is because I'm going to use the complex sentence that we previously looked at. And we're going to analyze that same sentence. P or Q implies R. Now, if P represents the animal eats fish, and Q represents the animal is a bird, and R represents the animal can fly. So we want to analyze this sentence, the logic sentence. If the animal eats fish or is a bird, then it can fly. We're going to analyze that sentence. So let's first start off with some truth assignments. And when I make a concrete example like this, it has to be something that's connected to the natural world or the world that students are familiar with, at least partially familiar. And if they're not completely familiar with it, I provide the background information. So here's what I mean by that. The first truth assignment we'll look at is represented by all 3 of the proposition constants are true. And I'm going to say that corresponds to an osprey in the natural world. If you remember in the previous video, we talked about how to build this truth table for the sentence P or Q implies R. Okay. Now I want to make some correlations between the logical model of that truth table and the natural world. That's what we're going to do. And I'm going to do it with, for example, an osprey. So what I'm saying is, if it is true that the animal eats fish and the animal is a bird, then the animal can fly. That's what I'm saying. And that is a true statement in case 1. The osprey is the example. Okay, but case 2 is the animal eats fish, the animal is a bird, but it is false that the animal can fly, so the animal cannot fly. I say that's a penguin, or at least an example that makes that case concrete is a penguin. The third example, or the third case, the animal eats fish, the animal is not a bird, the animal can fly. Okay, that's a Belize fishing bat. Now, okay, I've already said that it has to be a concrete example that students are familiar with, or at least partially familiar with, and if they're not partially familiar with it, then I will provide them with the background information. So when you click on this link, it will take you to this video, and the video looks like this. And notice the Belize fishing bat is catching a fish. Okay, that's a little longer video. You could certainly look at it, and students might not know about the Belize fishing bat. That's why I say I have to provide the background information for them in some cases. That's why along here I've provided links. There's also a link to show an osprey fishing and so forth. Many of them they may already be familiar with, but in the case of a Belize fishing bat, maybe not. Okay. The fourth example I say correlates to a dolphin because it's true the animal eats fish, false the animal is a bird. So an animal that eats fish and is not a bird and cannot fly. Okay. So here's an animal that does not eat fish, but it is a bird and it can fly. That's a hummingbird, or an example of that would be a hummingbird. Here's another one. An animal that does not eat fish, is a bird, but cannot fly. That's an ostrich, or an example of that would be an ostrich. Let's see, here's an example of the 7th case, which is animal does not eat fish, animal is not a bird, but the animal can fly. Well, that's a dragonfly. It doesn't eat fish. It's not a bird, but it can fly. Okay? And here's an example of an animal that does not eat fish, it's not a bird, and it cannot fly. Well, that's a rattlesnake. Or that's one possibility. So why have I done this? Like, why go to all the trouble to create a sample world? It's simple. Because if you don't create a sample world, then everything is abstract, and holding those abstractions in the minds of students at this stage of their development is very difficult. They need something concrete to hang their knowledge on. So I can now use this world that I've created to go back and talk about certain truth values. So, for example, if the truth value is true, true, false, I'll say, remember, that was like the penguin example in our complex sentence. All right, this is just a strategy. I realize that it takes time, but I promise you that will be worth the time in the long run. Okay, the question is, okay, so students would ask me this a lot. Well, is this sentence true or false? And the answer is, it's true for cases 1, 3, 5, 7, and 8, and it's false for cases 2, 4, and 6. And so the answer to their question, is the sentence true or false, is it depends on which case are we talking about. I think that students struggle with the idea that, oh, they want a sentence to always be true or always be false. And we'll talk about the cases where that occurs, but in this case it's not. It's not valid. What I'm saying is sometimes the sentence is true and sometimes it's false. That's going to very often be our case.